Okay, everyone. Good morning. I'm sorry that we had Zoom problems, but I'll try and do this way and send a recording afterwards. Unfortunately, it means it won't be as interactive as usual, but be that as it may. We were learning the Gemara in Daf Ein Gimel Amud Beis. Amar of Papa, Haiman de Shoda Pisa Ledikla. The Osa Tamri Chayv Shtaim. So someone threw a clod of earth at the palm tree and it removed dates, the Chayv Shtaim, Achas Mishum Tolesh, Achas Mishum Mafarik. One because of Tolesh and one because of Mafarik. This is the view of Rav Papa. One because of Tolesh, which is a co-av or a tolda of Kotzer, as we discussed. And one because of Mafarik, which is debatable what melachot that is. But Rashi learns that it's the melachot of Dosh, and we'll look at that in a few moments. Rav Ashi is cholik on Rav Papa that both ein derech Tlisha b'kach ve'ein derech Perika b'kach. This isn't the derech, and therefore there's no chiyuv. And we'll see in a few moments near the end of the shir what that means. Hopefully today, what that means that ein derech Tlisha and ein derech Perika b'kach. Now, just very briefly, we looked last time at the Rishonim and the view of the Rishonim about what this melacha of Achas Mishum Mafarik is, what exactly this melacha is of removing the tree, of throwing this clod of earth and somehow removing the something from the decal. And Rashi told us that this is the Shoda Pisa Ledikla, V'asa Tamra, Tolesh Mafarik, Tolda the Dosh. He says this is a Tolda of Dosh, Shemafarik Tavua Mishibalea. In Dosh, you remove the grain from its casing. Loshem Perik min achamar. Similarly over here, Mafarik hatmorim min machbedus. One's removing the tmorim, the dates from their machbedus, which is the sort of cluster of dates within which they're found. Interestingly, the Rishonim seem to have understood Rashi differently, or had a different girsa in Rashi. And they seem to understand that Tosfos says Mafarik ha'ilon mimaso min haperetz. You're removing the fruit. You're removing machbeda, the masa, the load of the fruit from the tree. And the Ramban quotes Rashi, She'atzeh Mafarik tamarim min hadekel. You're removing the tamarim from the dekel, which is not what Rashi in front of us says. The miyuchas luran, which I quoted last time, also doesn't seem to have had this girsa in Rashi. And the Ramban says, what is the malacha? El ikar perush k'divra omesh in itloshim min machbedus. V'achach doshin oisam. The shot pisa dikla nitlosh machbedus min hadekel k'shem noifim na'aretz mikoichoi nifrokim ha'tamarim min machbedus. So he says when the tamarim fall to the ground, they break apart from the machbedus, from the bunch, from the cluster within which they're found. And therefore, effectively, he's saying similar to Rashi, which is our Rashi, that the dosh is removal of the fruit from the cluster as opposed to the fruit from the tree or from the cluster from the tree, as per how they seem to cite Rashi. The only difference is that he specifies it's not the clod of earth which knocks the fruit from the cluster, but rather it is the falling to the ground which does so. And this is also explicit in the handout sheets and the run which we quoted. When they fall to the ground, then the tamarim are broken apart from the eshkol, from the cluster of tamarim of dates within which they're found. So far we've had effectively two pshatim in Achas Mishum Mafarik, Rashi and the Ramban stroke run, both of whom learn it's the removal of the fruit from the eshkol. However, the Ran and the Ramban specify that this is when it falls by it falling to the ground. Tosfos brings Rashi, as we said, and he says, Ein nira l'ri. It doesn't appear that this is a reasonable pshat according to the Ri. He doesn't explain why not. He doesn't tell us what Tosfos' problem is, the Ri's problem is with Rashi's pshat. And he says it's the removal of the klippa eliona, the outer layer of the skin. And we left this difficult last time. It's not clear exactly what this outer layer is. In Metzias, as far as I could tell, this outer layer seems to just become a very thin skin afterwards, which is perfectly edible. I saw in the Yeshiva-style, who is an Achron, contemporary of the Chafetz Chaim, more or less, who from Europe and then later moved to Yerushalayim, a very important halachic work on Hilchos Shabbos, and he asks this question. He says this klippa isn't kayames, it doesn't remain after the fruit is developed, and if he doesn't understand Tosfos' pshat, we try to work out the metzias to the best of our ability using Google, what exactly is the metzias over here, and it doesn't appear to be clear cut either. So this is the view, be that as it may, of of Tosfos, and Tosfos doesn't tell us, interestingly, what his question on Rashi is, why he doesn't want to learn like Rashi. Now, the Ramban, when there is a third Peshat floating around over here, which is the view that the Rishonim ascribe to Rashi. So far we've said Rashi, as we have in front of him, that it's removal of the date from the cluster by throwing the clod of earth. The Ramban and the Ran who say it's removal of the date from the cluster when it lands on the ground. Tosfos, this is the third Peshat, who says that it's Mefarik by removing the peel. And Rashi, as cited by the Rishonim, who say it's knocking the fruit off the tree. We don't have that in Rashi, seemingly, but that's a fourth Peshat cited by the Rishonim in the Gemara. Now, what would be wrong with this Peshat? Why do the Rishonim not understand, not like this? So the Ramban just says, he says, if this was the case, then every time one harvests, one would also transgress the prohibition of dosh. He says, every time I'm boitzer, every time I harvest olives or grapes or anything else, I'm also chayev shtayim, because this is, if you're going to argue that removal of the fruit from the tree is dosh, then you should always be mechayev shtayim. He doesn't say why not, though. Okay, I mean, that's a good question. But if this is within the definition of dosh, what's lacking in the concept of threshing that isn't applicable every time I pick a fruit from the tree? After all, threshing is somehow removing the fruit from its container, removing it from its location, from where it is. So what exactly is actually the difference between Kotzer and dosh? So there seems to be two answers to this question. The first answer to the question is found in the Ran. And the Ran says, "Ein disha b'mechuba ela b'tolish," that disha is only mechuba only when it is. There's no disha when it's mechuba, when it's still attached to the tree. Disha is once it is tolush, once it's detached from the tree, and that's the problem. In other words, if we think about the procedure with wheat, first kotzer, you first remove the wheat from the ground, and then you are, which is tolish, parallel to talisha, and then you thresh it, which is the removal from the husks, which is the second stage, and therefore it's a rule that there's no disha b'mechuba lekaka. Now, what would be the rationale of this rule? The Ran doesn't say explicitly why this is. Incidentally, this concept is found in Rashi himself also. Rashi in Kesuvos, Daf Samach, the Ramaskal Mefarik, also says the same thing. He says, Mefarik, hanotek dova mimokim shegadol bo, v'lo min ha-mechuba. He says, remove something from the place within it which it grew, but not from mechuba, not when it's attached to the ground, elo min ha-tolish, when it's detached. Now, why should this be the case? What would be the svara to say that only when it is mechuba, only when it is tolush is there the melachot of disha, not when it is mechuba? And the answer could be that this is indeed the essence of the difference between the two melachos of kotzer and dosh. They're stages in the mechanical process in Siddur Pas. And a bit like conceptually, we'll see later, there may not be a clear distinction between boira and zora and Marakade, the various sieving processes, which we discussed when we learnt the Gemara at the bottom of this Amud, other than they are stages in the process. Similarly, dosh is a stage that by definition comes after kotzer. If you remove something in the language of Rashi, minatek, mimokim, shegodolbo, you remove it from the place within which it grew when it's still attached, then that is the definition of kotzer. That's what kotzer is, removing it from the place within which it grew. And dosh is removing it from the place within which it grew once it is detached from within the body of the growth itself. So this would be the machlokas, the issue over here. This is why Tosfos says he doesn't agree with Rashi, perhaps, who says it's removal from the dekel, and maybe this is pshat in the Ramban, and the Ran seems to say this explicitly, that this is the issue with Rashi's, what is ascribed to Rashi, the ein disha b'mechuba ela b'tolosh. Now there is another alternative explanation as to what is bothering Tosfos with what he quotes from Rashi, more accurately, what else would be a problem with Shittas Rashi if Mefarik here means the removal of the fruit from the machbedas, from the bunch. And this is a question of the Eglei Tal, in which he asks on the view of Rashi. he says if removal of a fruit from a bunch is dosh, mafarik, how can we ever pick a grape from the bunch? And this is a question asked by the Eglei Tal. I don't know in the context of the Shiur if we mentioned Eglei Tal before, so I'll just mention him very briefly. Eglei Tal is a very, very important sefer on Hilchos Shabbos, written by a Hasidic leader called Rabbi Bornstein of Sochachov. Lived in the late 1800s to early 1900s. He's also the author of Avnei Nezer, very important, other important halachic work and shuva work. He was a Talmud student of the famed Kotzer Rebbe, and he was the father of his son Reb Shmuel Bornstein, who was the author of a Hasidic work in Machshava and Hasidic philosophy called the Shem Shmuel, very important halachic writer, Rabbi Avram of Sochachov, the father, who wrote a sefer called Eglei Tal on Hilchos Shabbos, very important sefer. And he asks a question, as we said on Rashi, how can Rashi say that it's mafarik removing something from the bunch? Now, one possible answer to this question, and this is put forward by the Achronim, but I saw this in the Meiri, which I put in the printout sheets also. The Meiri says, Ein mafarik elo motzi dava mimokum shenista sham. He says mafarik is only when you remove something from a place within which it is concealed, within which it is hidden. Now, if mafarik means mechusa, as per the language of Tosfos, that has to be covered, then it is correct to say that there wouldn't be mafarik when you remove the fruit, the date, from the bunch. However, if it's mokum shenista sham, the Meiri implies that the date, packed very tightly into its cluster, would be called mokum shenista sham, and therefore this would be enough to make one chayav in the melacha of mafarik. Grapes, on the other hand, grapes are in a looser bunch, and therefore nothing new is created by this removal of the grape from the bunch. The grape is already visible as an independent, freestanding fruit, simply part and attached to a bunch, but not in this starshom, not hidden there such that I'm bringing something new into existence, and therefore that wouldn't be the melacha of mafarik, the melacha of dosh, and this would be the chiluk between the two. Tosfos learns mechusa, and therefore in the bunch wouldn't be enough, it's not covered. However, in this, they're hidden there, it's not a layer or a peel, like the shell of the clipper of the grain in the equivalent parallel melacha when it comes to wheat. However, it's still hidden there, and therefore that's sufficient as per the language of the Meiri, and according to Rashi, to be applicable even with dates in a cluster. Now, interestingly, Rashi wouldn't appear to agree to this defense of his shitta. How did we defend Rashi, who said that removal of a tzmara from a machbeda is mafarik, whereas removal of a grape from a cluster is not mafarik? The answer is that Rashi, the Meiri says, it has to be nista sham, it has to be concealed there, and the grape in the cluster is not nista, is not concealed. However, we already mentioned Rashi in Ksuvas, the Samach Amud Aleph Divrei Maskal Mafarik, who says that this distinction that we mentioned before, that mafarik is only when it is mechuba, not when it's, is only when it's tolosh, not when it is mechuba. But the language of Rashi there is revealing. Rashi says, "Hanotik dava mimokum shegodal bo v'lo min mechuba." The melacha is when you remove it from the place wherein it grew, and not from mechuba, elo min atolosh, but only from when it's detached. Rashi doesn't here mention a word about mechusa or nistar, hidden or being covered. He just says when you remove it from the mokum shegodal bo, the place it grew. In which case, Rashi seems to be learning that this is the whole difference between Kotzer and dosh. That Kotzer is when you remove it from the place it grew in the sense of being mechuba and no longer mechuba, perhaps reminding us of the discussion that we had before, whether it's removal from the place or whether it's removal from the yanika, from the giddel, from the growth and the nourishment that it derives, as we discussed when we looked at Kotzer. Whereas dosh is removing it just from the place within it which it grew, and therefore takes place only in the second stage. It's the second stage in the process once it is tolosh. But Rashi doesn't mention the condition of needing to be mechusa or nista. Interestingly, what else then could we say about why Rashi learns that removal of the machbeda, the fruit from the machbeda, is chayev because of dosh, and the removal of the grape from the cluster isn't chayiv because of dosh? So here we would come on to the answer of the Eglei Tal. And the Eglei Tal brings a principle which we see already in the Shulchan Aruch, in which he says the distinction is, when is it normal to be toilish the fruit? Is it part of the manufacturing process, or is it part of the eating process? When it comes to dates are sold separately, or perhaps part of a little string of dates, but they're certainly not sold as part of the machbeda, and therefore this is part of the manufacturing process, as opposed to grapes, which are sold in bunches, and just before you eat, you remove them, and therefore this isn't part of the manufacturing process. So here we come to another yesod in the melachos of the Yud Aleph melachos, the 11 melachos of Sidura de Pras, of the preparation of bread or food in general. In Boirer, which we looked at in Ein Daled Amud Aleph extensively, we saw there was a patur and sometimes even a heter of derech achila. If I'm not doing that as a melacha, which is trying to create a creative outcome, produce and manufacture something new, but I'm just doing it as a derech achila, then this would be potter and even mutter. Here, the Eglei Tal is taking this far a little further. And he's saying, even if I'm not doing it derech achila, even if I'm harvesting my grapes and I'm removing them from the bunch a long time before the meal, nonetheless, at least min ha-Torah, this would be mutter, because the essence of the malacha is a malacha that takes place as part of the manufacturing process. With grapes, it's not part of the manufacturing process. Generally speaking, it's part of the eating process, and therefore, even if I do it earlier, I would be potter. Whereas with dates, where it's part of the manufacturing process, it's a stage in the Siddur of the Pas, therefore it's forbidden. And in a sense, this ties in nicely with the other idea that it's only a malacha when it's done, when it's tolosh, not when it's mechuber, because there's a stage and process to these things. The first stage in manufacturing the food is removing it from growing from the ground, however we define Kotzer. The second stage is the dosh, removing it from the place wherein it was growing. Whether you need mechusar or not, according to Rashi, seeming you don't need that it's covered and you don't need that it was hidden, but this is a stage in the manufacture. With grapes, it isn't a stage in manufacture, and therefore the Shulchan Aruch paskins that you are allowed to do it, or it's even, at least it's potter to do, even if it isn't miyad, even if it isn't immediately before the eating, and indeed it's mutter to do. I don't want to go too much into the issue of koleif, of peeling, which could possibly be a boira or could possibly be a dosh, other than to mention that the Shulchan Aruch says with respect to Botzel and Shum, this is the Shulchan Aruch in Siman, the end of Siman Shin Kaf Aleph, he says you're allowed to peel Botzel and Shum in order to eat immediately, and the Isser is only when you peel them much earlier than the meal. And again, this seems to be contradictory to the idea that with nuts you're not allowed to peel them, even if you have it only at the time of achila, because it doesn't. We don't have the normal heter of derech achila with dosh like we do with boira, and in addition with nuts, perhaps you're removing the pasoles by removing the shell rather than the oichel metoicha pasoles. So the normal leniencies wouldn't apply, and therefore just because it's before you eat, that wouldn't be enough to allow you to peel the nuts. Nonetheless, when it comes to botzel and shum, you're allowed to eat even when you are peeling the botzel and shum just before the meal. It's mutter. Maishna, what's the difference? And again, the difference may be, as per the thesis of the Eglei Tal, that with nuts, it's normal or it's common to peel them even before the eating process. Most of the nuts we get already are cracked from the shell, probably because of pragmatic reasons. It's difficult to crack them, and they're messy, and therefore they're peeled beforehand, and it's not necessary for preserving the taste of the nut, as opposed to botzel and shum, where the freshness is kept, and it's not so difficult to peel them, and therefore they're prepared just before you're about to eat them. But why does this make a difference? What's the svara here? L'chalik says Eglei Tal. You see that dosh is a process in the manufacture, and therefore it's only things which are common to remove in the manufacturing process, which we do with dates, because the machbedas are big and heavy, and it's not convenient to serve them like that, as opposed to grapes, where the bunches are smaller, and therefore it's normal to do b'derech achila, and therefore the whole malacha doesn't exist with respect to deraisa, at least with respect to botzel and shum, and similarly with respect to grapes. So this is a second svara in the sugya, and an answer to the second attack on the shitta of Rashi. Why would there be mafarik over here when I remove it from the machbedas? The answer is because either because it's concealed and hidden in the machbeda as opposed to the grape which it's revealed, and therefore no significant change is happening, or because the machbeda it's normal to do it with grapes and it's not normal to do it with dates, and this is part of the manufacturing process. Now there is a problem with all of this, which is Rashi later on in the Masechet of Tzadi Hey, which is the sugya of cholev, which we'll look at hopefully in the next year. And there Rashi defines mafarik in the context of cholev, and he says it's porik oichel mimokim sheniskasa. Now there, not only does he not say, like he seems to imply in the Rashi and Kesuvos that we quoted, in which Rashi just says, notik dover mimokim shegodol, you did touch something from the place it grows, but he goes even further than the Meiri, who says which is the mokum shenistasham, a place where it's hidden, and here he says it has to be niskase. Now this I don't know how to resolve. How can Rashi say on the one hand that removal of the date from the machbedas is mafarik, which we could explain it's nista as per the Meiri, but to say it's niskasa, it's covered, seems to be difficult. So this remains a little unclear and unresolved. Possibly Rashi is just adding that condition on niskasa there in the context of cholev to explain why milking can be mafarik, when after all this isn't a mokum gidl, and therefore Rashi is explaining even though it's not gidl but it's niskasa, so it can be mafarik, either removing it, as he says in Ksuvas, from a mokum shagodol, menotic dover mokum shagodol, or mafarik from a kisoy, from a covering. But that remains a little bit of a problem. I should mention, just for the sake of completion, that there is another possibility as to why peeling onions and garlic is allowed, which is as far as Rabbi Kiva, in which he says the klippa is bottled to the pri. It's not that you have a shell and then you have the pri itself, it's just a very thin layer which is part of the pri already. We're not going to go into the technicalities of koileth and the melachot of dosh in this context, but there may be other answers to the question, but be that as it may, the reason, the svara put forward by the Eglei Tal to explain why garlic and onion can be peeled lechatchila before the meal, immediately before the meal, would also suffice to explain the difference between removing from the dates from the machbeda and removing a grape from its bunch. I now want to move on to Rav Ashi's statement. Rav Ashi says, "Ein derech p'tlisha bekach, the ein derech perika bekach." Now, there's a number of ways of understanding why this isn't the derech, what makes this a shinoi. That's the chora, seemingly what he says, that it's not the derech, it's not the way, therefore it's a shinoi, and therefore he says you're not chayiv, it may be still osa, but it's a potter of a losa, there isn't a chiyuv deraisa. Now the first thing to mention, is, and I'm unclear if this is a possible reading of Rav Ashi himself or not, is that at least that there's something interesting going on over here. Because I'm not doing the talisha and the perika with my direct action, but rather I'm doing it with my koyach, with koicho. This is a general shas concept, a concept in many other areas of halacha. Whether I do an action directly by acting with my hands or with an instrument that I'm using, or whether I implant an energy, a potential energy, a koyach or kinetic energy into an object. Now I'm distant from the object, and the object now independently and removed from my input, which is historical, does the action. So here when I'm shod or pisa, at that point I'm no longer there. I'm no longer active. It's now all inherent in the entity that I've thrown. And therefore it's the entity, the object, the clod of earth that does it rather than me, myself. And it's only through my koyach, through the energy that I've imparted, that it happens, rather than through my direct maisa. Now is this called my maisa, my action, or not? And if it is, there's a whole realm of interesting halachas to think about. What happens if someone throws the clod of earth and then regrets it? What happens if at the moment of throwing it there was shogeg, and by the time the clod of earth arrives it's mazed? Or it was mazed and it becomes shogeg? Or someone throws something to kill someone and in the interim regrets it and wants to pull it back? To what degree, what is the nature of the causal relationship between me and the outcome? It's not maisa, it's koyach. This is a general shastra that I'm not going to go into, but the first point to make over here is, this is the first and perhaps intuitive distinction, is that I'm doing it through my koyach, through my action, through the force that I've imparted in an object, rather than through the maisa itself. Now, Rashi doesn't learn that this is the reason why it's ein derech tlisha or prisha bekach, because let's have a look at Rashi. Rashi says, ein derech tlisha prika bekach, ali de zuika, ela oi beyad, oi bekeli. And therefore there's a tolesh kilachayad or potter. So Rashi seems to imply that the issue is that it isn't done in the normal manner of talisha or perika, which is done with the hands or with the keli. Rashi doesn't say that the point is that this is a koyach, which is a shas sugya, that is not him, the person who's doing it at all, but it's just koicho. So I'm not going to go further in this point, other than to point out that you see that in principle, according to Rashi, koicho isn't a lack in melachos. Melachos don't need to be done through my direct ma'aseh, my direct act, but they can even be done through koicho, and that would be enough. The chesaron, the problem over here, is it's not ein derech, it's not done with biyodo b'kli, but the problem isn't that, a deeper problem, that with melachos you need the ma'aseh rather than a koyach. So this is just something to file away in the general shas concept of koicho, that here we seem to have a source, at least in Rashi, that koicho is enough to be a ma'aseh with respect, at least, to melachos. I'll add here, as an aside, that there are achronim that discuss the concept of koyach koicho. What happens if something is neither my maisa, nor the koyach, the energy that I've implanted in something, but I implant energy in something which implants energy in something else, and then that goes and does the melacha. So this is a causal chain of koyach koicho. And there's another Sameach from Rameh Simcha of Devinsk, who says that koyach koichoi would not be enough. Even if we say that koichoi is an action, koichoi would not be an action. Interestingly, there seems to be a raya in our sugya not like this principle, and that even koyach koichoi could be enough. And this is found in the words of the Ramban and the Run that we mentioned before, because they say, when does the parika take place? When it hits the ground. In other words, it's not that the clod of earth knocks the fruit out of the machbeda, like you could learn in Rashi, but the clod of earth knocks the machbeda off the tree, and when it lands on the ground that knocks the fruit out of the machbeda, out of the bunch, and that's enough to do the melacha of mafarik, were not for the fact that ein derech talisha and ein derech mafarik bekach, ein derech parika bekach. In which case you see that even koyach koich is enough, because let's work out what's happened over here. I'm planted energy in the clod, which knocks the fruit, the machbeda, the bunch off the tree. That's koicho, which does the malacha of talisha. That in turn transfers energy to the clod, the potential energy, which was already inherent in it and being held up in the air, which then falls to the ground, and the energy of the impact transferred to the energy of the impact, action, and reaction, now knocks the fruit off the bunch. So here you have koyach koichoi, or perhaps even koyach koichoi, because it's knocking off the tree, flying through the air, and then hitting the ground. And nonetheless, that is enough in principle to be considered as action, were it not for the fact that ein derech bekach. So again, just something to file away as part of a shas sugya, a very interesting topic of imparting koyach in something, whether this is enough to make you chayiv or not. Again, more interesting in the context of melacha, where it needs to be my engagement with the act, than perhaps in the context of other actions. When it comes to other actions, if I fire an arrow at someone, that's koichoi, and yet that would be an act of ritzicha. Over here, we're talking about Masechet Shabbat, where I have to engage with it, as we've discussed before. A melachot is not a normal action. That's why there's the concept of ein derech, the very concept of shinoi. Why does shinoi make a difference if I do it in an unusual manner? Somebody comes to Beis Din up for trial for murder, and is a chayiv, potentially chayiv for ritzicha, and says, I did it with the shinoi, I fired the gun with my left hand. That wouldn't be an exemption. This is a svara in melechas machshavas, an engagement in the asek of the action of a melacha. So we see that murder is an action, a maisa, but melacha is engagement with the maisa. Nonetheless, when it comes to koicha, when you could have thought this is lacking engagement, even koicha is enough. It's my long arm of the energy that I impart, and therefore this is enough of an engagement for malacha. So it would appear in Rashi and in the Ramban and the Ram, arguably even koicha. Very interesting idea. I'll just conclude this discussion by speaking about what Rashi does say. Rashi says the reason why it's ein derech parika or talisha bekach is because it has to be biyad o bekeli. Now, here I'm not sharing my own ideas, my own knowledge. I'm just saying what I've seen brought in the Achronim who discuss these ideas. Unfortunately, I don't have enough knowledge to have known these Maramakomis, these sources by myself. There is a Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, and I printed this in the source sheet, in which the Gemara discusses not smelling what you can and can't smell on Shabbos. And the Gemara says that you can't smell an esrog, you can't smell a hadas, even when it's attached mechuba on Shabbos, because we're not worried about you picking it. However, an esrog, which is mechuba, you can't smell on Shabbos. The Gemara in Sukkah Lamed Zayin on the base. My tama, hadas dolariach koi, a hadas is only there for smelling, lo osin migzah, you won't come to cut it. Esrog dolachila koi, an esrog, if you allow him to smell it, since it's there for eating, maybe the person will be tempted to eat it, and therefore will come to pick it. In other words, the hadas you won't be tempted to pick. You can smell it perfectly well on the tree. However, the esrog, you can't eat it unless you pick it, and therefore you're chayiv. Now Rashi explains, esrog de la chilakoi, he says, kumarachle, a minshi, when you smell it, you will forget, v'tolish v'achale, and you'll pick it and eat it. V'afim oichle b'mechuba. Says Rashi, why is there this chashash? In the same way as you can smell something b'mechuba, sure, you can eat something when it's mechuba. You can smell it when it's attached, and you can eat it when it's attached by biting into the attached fruit. Says Rashi, einachot tolesh godol mazeh. If you bite into the fruit, you have no greater tolesh than that. You're detaching it from makom geduloi by the act of biting and eating. Asked the Magen Avraham, surely this is a direct stira to Rashi in front of us, because Rashi in front of us says that tolesh and mafarik have to be done biyad o bekli, and Rashi there says it can be done bepiv, with his mouth. And therefore the Magen Avraham learns that Rashi in our sugya doesn't mean to exclude only zorik even. Rashi says anything which isn't derech tli, anything which isn't kli o biyad would be potter, and therefore Rashi can't mean in sukkah that you are chayiv for doing it with your mouth. He says it would only be a potter aval osa. Rabbi Kiva Eger asks, and this is a strong question, that that's not the lashon of Rashi. Rashi says ein lecha toleish gadol mizeh. You have no greater tlisha than biting into it, seeming to imply that this would be a chiyuv. In which case we have a stira to Rashi in front of us who seems to learn that only b'kli or biyad. The Eglei Tal, who we mentioned before, answers this question, and he says that when Rashi says it's only b'kli or biyad, it's better to say that Rashi is lav dafka. The point is that zorik is not the derech to chop something off. However, biyad or b'kli is the derech, and occasionally prepare by directly biting something also is the derech. If someone is in a rush and just wants to immediately eat something, they may not bother picking the fruit of the tree, but may just bite into it directly, as opposed to normal case in which you're harvesting, in which case it would be yad or b'kli. And Rashi therefore just mentions the normal ways of doing it, and indeed with the mouth generally wouldn't be the derech, but if one's doing it as a rush, then this mehirus and speed, then this would be the melachot, so this is Eglei Tal, as we see from Rashi. Basically, the take-home part of this is a machlokas, how to read Rashi by us. Is the Gemara only coming to exclude zorek, or is it coming on the contrary to say that only biyad or b'kli is the derech and nothing else is the derech? Two ways of reading Rashi and a potential conflict to the Gemara in Sukkah. I'll stop over there. That's Ein Derech Tlisha B'kach. Next year, in Yetz Hashem, we will look at Mefarik in the context of Cholev and look at the Tosfos and various other Rishonim that argue about what Cholev is, and that will bring us to an end, I hope, in Yetz Hashem, to the Sugya, and I wish everyone a